So, welcome to the first video on programming with Pete. I'm going to show you how to give you an introduction to processing, which is based on Java, and you don't need to know anything. And you can start with me and hopefully learn how to program. So the first thing you're going to do is go to processing.org and download processing for whatever OS you have. It's free. They do take donations, which would be nice if you can do that, but it's otherwise free, and you're going to download that, install it, and run it, and then here we're going to have an intro to processing. So that's a different window. File, new window. So here I have a sketch window, and this is just a text editor. This is going to let me type the code that processing will then run, execute, and turn into my these are going to be mostly image-based things or drawing-based programs. Good practice is just to right away do a save as. So I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to call this number 1. And we're going to start programming now. So today what I want to do is talk about functions, arguments, and drawing and processing. And I want to make a program today that draws some random rectangles. And I can start that out with just typing without doing a loop or anything. I can just draw some rectangles. So I'm going to use a function called rectangle. You know it's a function because it's got parentheses after it. And the parentheses are there to hold arguments. And a rectangle requires some things. It needs to know its location on the x-axis, the y-axis, and it needs a width and a height. And I'm going to push some information into that. So these are just placeholders, and this is what they stand for. So the first one is the x location, second one is the y location, the third is the width of the rectangle, and that's the height. So if I put in some new numbers in here and say I want it to be at 10, 10, and I want it to be 50, 40, it's going to locate the top left corner of a rectangle at 10, 10 and make it 50 by 40. And if I run that program, we got a little teeny 100 by 100 default screen with one rectangle at 1010, the top left corner, that's 50 by 40. So let's complicate this. Let's make it a little more fun. And we don't want to look at a teeny screen. So I'm going to use a function called size. So size needs parentheses. It's a function. And it needs at least 2 parameters. So we're going to do the width of our screen. Let's do 600 by 400 today. Semicolon's like the period. It's just saying we're done with this function. And press play. So now I have a bigger screen. It's still at 1010. It's 50 by 40. So this is a static program. This happens once and it stops. It makes the size with my size function. It makes the rectangle with my rectangle function. And it ends. What if I wanted to make a rectangle that was a little more unpredictable? Inside this function, where the arguments go for this rectangle function, I can add another function called random. And I could say I want this to be random between a range, and this is the x coordinates, the first argument, from 0 to 600. So I'm going to get a random number for the first argument between 0 and 600. For the second one, I'm going to use my height of my size, which is 400, to get a random number. And we can just do random for the width. We'll say 100, and random for the height, 100. So the random function is a function inside, and it's going to return a number to the first argument, second argument, third argument, fourth argument, just like we had 10, 10, 50, 40 before. So if I run this, I'm going to get one rectangle. If I run it again, I'm going to get one rectangle. Run it again. Well, what if I wanted this program to do that for a while? Well, actually, let's complicate this a little more. We want some color in this because this is pretty boring with just a white rectangle and a gray background. So I'm going to use a function called background. And background wants a value that's either grayscale, which would be one argument. So if I say 128, that's going to give me halfway between 0 and 255 for a gray background. And if I use a function called fill, rectangle is going to look to fill because that's part of the rectangle function that it's dependent on the fill if a fill happens before it, and it's going to go get that fill number. So if I say 255 comma 10 comma 10, I'm going to get a color for my fill that's mostly red, R, G, B, and we'll get a, so now I got a red rectangle on a gray background. And we could, instead of using hard-coded numbers, we'll always get the same color now, I can substitute those three arguments for a function, random, that's going to return a value to that first argument with a value between 0 and 255, which is the range of R and G and B in red, green, blue color space. So now, gray background, a little in the corner there. And let's pull, instead of having a gray background that's the same, I'm going to use these random functions, and I'm going to put them in my background function, and those three randoms are going to return values for my background. So this is a static program, happens once. What if I wanted this to happen over and over and over and over and over? Because that's what computers are good at, doing things over and over and over. I need to add a couple functions. Setup is the function. That void is there because it's a function with no return. It follows what's inside of it, what's inside of these curly brackets. And that's all it's going to do. So I didn't have any arguments in the parentheses for setup, but I told it to do this size, make my background, and then down here we want something to loop. I want this fill to change every frame, and I want a new rectangle on every frame. So I'm going to use a function called draw, and it's void because it's not going to return anything. It's not going to return a value. It's going to just do what I've told it to. So that's what's inside these curly braces. So parentheses need arguments sometimes they don't. Curly brackets means sort of like just do what's in there. And that'll become more understandable when we start doing conditions. So this program has a setup function. It's going to make a piece of paper. It's going to pick a background number or a background value, color, and once, because setup only happens once. That's one of the specific things about it. And draw is a function that happens over and over and over. So this is going to make a new fill color. Rectangle is going to use that fill color, draw a random rectangle, and then it's going to go back up and do it again and do it again and do it again. So if we run this, we have a program that lights lots of random rectangles. And if I change my size function to a full screen function, I'm going to hide my size with two forward slashes. So that means when I execute the program, it's going to ignore this line with the two slashes. It's going to use the full screen. And this is what our program looks like. Uh-oh, I made a mistake. So my range of values is only in that 400 to 600, the locations. Remember, my rectangle is using random 600 and random 400, so all my rectangles happened up in the corner. But what if I said random width, which means it's going to go get the size of my whole screen, or if size was open, it would get this first function because width is a built-in variable that's dependent on you declaring it in your size function or your full screen. So now my possible x location for my rectangles is from 0 to the width, and my possible Y location for my rectangle is 0 to height. And now if I run this, we can have rectangles that appear all over the entire screen. So processing, this is our first program. We wrote one that makes random rectangles. They have a random fill color, and they're located randomly on the whole page. They're only size 100 to 100. 0 to 100 is their possibility space. And the background will be different every time. So let's just go over one more time with our functions. So we have a function called full screen now. It's a function. You know that because it's got the parentheses. We have a background function, which needs 1, 2, 3 arguments for RGB color, red, green, blue. And we have a draw function that happens over and over that's going to get a fill value, red, green, blue, and draw a random rectangle. And with that, I'm going to end my first ever programming tutorial on YouTube and watch my view numbers skyrocket. All right, hopefully I will hear from some of you or see or know that you are here again. Bye.